The shadows didn't follow us. They led. They led us down a path into the deepest, most terrifying corners of existence, where the very fabric of reality thins to a whisper, and the void itself stares back, unblinking, unfeeling, and utterly hungry. This is the story of Project Umbra, a clandestine endeavour born from an ambition so profound it warped into a nightmare. An experiment designed to pierce the veil of the absolute darkest substance known to man, and in doing so, accidentally, catastrophically, unravel something far more fundamental than mere light. You see, the world thought it knew darkness. It thought Vanta, that engineered marvel capable of absorbing 99.96% of visible light, was the ultimate frontier. A material so profoundly black it rendered three-dimensional objects into two-dimensional abysses, a void manufactured by human ingenuity. But what if there was something beyond Vanta? Something that didn't merely absorb light, but consumed the very essence of being, something that transcended material science and encroached upon metaphysics. That was the chilling premise of Project Umbra, spearheaded by Dr. Aris Thorne, a man whose genius was matched only by his reckless ambition, a theoretical physicist whose eyes held a perpetual glint of intellectual hunger, a hunger that would eventually devour him whole, alongside his entire team, and perhaps a sliver of the world they inhabited. Horizon Labs, a facility so deeply buried beneath the Mojave Desert that it felt less like a building and more like a tomb, was the birthplace of this cosmic horror, a labyrinth of steel, concrete and quantum computing power, all dedicated to pushing the boundaries of what was deemed possible. And Dr. Thorne, flanked by his brilliant but increasingly uneasy protégé, Dr. Lena Petrova, a quantum chemist with a profound respect for the delicate balance of the universe, and Dr. Kenji Tanaka, an experimental physicist whose jovial nature slowly eroded under the encroaching influence of their creation, were the unsuspecting architects of their own doom. They began with Vanta, not as an end, but as a stepping stone, a proof of concept. Understanding its intricate structure of carbon nanotubes, each one a microscopic trap for photons, a meticulously designed light sink. But Thorne's theories suggested a deeper quantum entanglement, a way to manipulate space-time at the subatomic level, not just to trap light, but to erase its very presence, to create a localized region where photons simply cease to exist, where energy itself found no foothold, and after years of arduous, sometimes seemingly futile research, punctuated by countless failures and near breakthroughs, they did it. They synthesized it. They called it, unofficially at first, the void material, then, more formally, Element Umbra, a name that now echoes with a chilling premonition of its true nature. The first glimpse of Umbra was not dramatic, not a flash or a bang, but an absence, a complete, absolute and terrifying negation of presence, a pinprick of darkness so profound that it didn't merely appear black, it appeared wrong, a tear in the visual fabric of reality itself. When they first placed a microscopic speck, barely visible to the naked eye even under intense illumination, into a specially designed, vacuum-sealed containment field, the instruments immediately went haywire, not because of interference, but because they simply couldn't register anything. The light sensors reported a null value. The thermal cameras detected a chilling anomaly, not merely the absence of heat, but a negative thermal signature, an active absorption of ambient thermal energy that left a localized pocket of unnerving cold, a phenomenon that defied conventional thermodynamics and sent a shiver down Petrova's spine despite the protective gear and the layers of lead-lined glass separating her from the sample. Thorne, however, was ecstatic, his eyes alight with a dangerous triumph, declaring it the ultimate light absorber, a material that made Vanta look like a poorly drawn charcoal sketch, a triumph of human intellect over the fundamental laws of physics. As they began to scale up from microscopic specks to nanogram samples, the unsettling properties of umbra became more pronounced, more insidious, and far more terrifying. For it wasn't just light and heat that it consumed, but something far more fundamental, something intrinsically woven into the very tapestry of existence. Dr. Tanaka, always the practical one, set up an array of acoustic sensors within the containment chamber, wanting to quantify umbra's interaction with sound waves. And initially, the results were as expected, a profound dampening of all auditory frequencies. But then something inexplicable happened. The sensors within a small radius of the umbra sample, despite being calibrated to detect even the faintest molecular vibrations, began to register nothing. An absolute silence, not just the absence of sound, but a negation of it, as if the very concept of vibration had been swallowed whole, leaving behind a localized pocket of unnerving auditory void that felt like a pressure on the eardrums. A deep, unsettling quiet that seemed to suck the very air out of the room. The technicians monitoring the sound feed reported a growing sense of claustrophobia and disorientation, a psychological distress that emanated from the sheer unnaturalness of the silence, a quiet that seemed to hum with an unheard, terrible hum. The psychological effects were the first truly alarming indicators that umbra was something beyond any known material, a phenomenon that didn't just interact with the physical world, but seeped into the very perception of those who observed it. Researchers assigned to umbra-related tasks began reporting strange occurrences, fleeting sensations of being watched by an unseen entity, an oppressive weight on their chests, vivid and disturbing nightmares that felt more like shared experiences than individual dreams. Dreams of endless, formless dark, of being slowly unmade, atom by atom, thought by thought. Dr. Petrova, ever the pragmatist, initially dismissed these as stress-induced hallucinations, the inevitable consequence of working on a high-stakes, cutting-edge project in an isolated environment. But as the reports became more frequent, more consistent, and alarmingly shared across multiple individuals who had no direct contact with each other, her scientific skepticism began to fray, replaced by a growing unease, a cold dread that hinted at something far more sinister at play, something that was actively reaching out, touching their minds, not with malice perhaps, but with an indifferent, consuming hunger. Thorne, however, remained stubbornly, dangerously focused on the material's physical properties, pushing for larger samples, convinced that the psychological effects were merely psychosomatic, an overreaction to the sheer alienness of umbra. He theorized that if they could create a large enough sample, perhaps they could harness its unique properties, perhaps even use its energy-absorbing capabilities to develop revolutionary power sources or stealth technologies, but Petrova argued vehemently against scaling up, citing the increasingly erratic readings from their environmental sensors, the inexplicable micro-fluctuations in the local gravitational field, the intermittent failures of their most robust quantum encrypted data links whenever they came too close to the umbra containment unit, and the unnerving, almost rhythmic energy spikes that seemed to pulse from within the blackness, not unlike a heartbeat, albeit a silent, alien one. Her warnings, steeped in caution and empirical observation, fell on deaf ears, drowned out by Thorne's fervent belief in the limitless potential of their creation, a belief that bordered on obsession, blurring the lines between scientific curiosity and a dangerous, almost cult-like devotion. Then came the disappearances, subtle at first, easily dismissed as misplacements or equipment malfunctions. A specialized sensor array, meticulously calibrated and logged, vanished from the edge of the containment field during a routine test, leaving no trace, no residue, no forensic evidence of its removal, just an empty space where it should have been. Then a small potted plant, placed as part of an experiment to test Umbra's effects on organic matter, withered and crumpled to dust in a matter of seconds, not decaying, not burning, but simply ceasing to be, its organic structure seemingly undone, its very existence erased from the physical realm. The security footage, when reviewed, showed nothing conclusive, just a flicker, a momentary distortion in the feed, and then the plant was gone, as if it had never existed, the temporal anomaly too brief to be truly processed, yet utterly undeniable in its terrifying implications. It wasn't just absorbing light or heat or sound, it was absorbing matter, not through conventional means of consumption, but through a terrifying process of active non-existence, a localized erasure of fundamental reality. The first living creature to be subjected to this horrifying erasure was a lab rat, part of a controlled experiment to understand Umbra's bioenergetic footprint, meticulously monitored and housed in a remotely operated, shielded environment within the larger containment chamber. The feed showed the rat, initially agitated, then curiously still, its tiny black eyes fixated on the increasing patch of Umbra, which by now had grown to the size of a small coin, its edges impossibly sharp, its surface an absolute, featureless void. Then, with a chilling lack of fanfare, the rat simply blinked out of existence, not a trace left behind, not a drop of blood, not a single hair, just an empty cage and a stunned silence from the observation room. Petrova gasped, her hand flying to her mouth, her face drained of colour, while Thorne, for the first time, showed a flicker of something beyond scientific curiosity, a nascent terror that momentarily dimmed the dangerous gleam in his eyes, but it was fleeting, quickly replaced by a renewed, almost manic determination to understand this terrifying phenomenon, to dissect the mechanics of absolute non-existence. He called it localized reality collapse, a term that did little to assuage the growing fear in his team. Dr. Kenji Tanaka, always the most empathetic of the group, began to withdraw, his once jovial demeanour replaced by a haunted pallor and a perpetual tremor in his hands. He confessed to Petrova, in hushed, trembling tones, that the nightmares had intensified, that he no longer dreamed of just darkness, but of being watched by an infinite, formless presence from within the dark. A presence that felt less like an entity and more like a fundamental principle of erasure, a slow, inevitable unmaking of everything he was. He spoke of waking up feeling lighter, emptier, as if fragments of his memories, his very personality, were being siphoned away, absorbed by the encroaching void. Petrova, witnessing his rapid decline, knew in her gut that this was not mere psychological stress, but a direct, insidious influence of Umbra, an absorption of consciousness itself, a consumption of the very soul, if such a thing could be scientifically quantified. She urged Thorne to cease the experiments, to initiate containment protocols, to alert the proper authorities, but Thorne, now almost entirely consumed by his obsession, simply dismissed her concerns as fear, as a lack of scientific fortitude, a weakness in the face of true discovery. The situation escalated violently when Umbra, now roughly the size of a golf ball, developed what appeared to be a subtle, almost imperceptible pulsation, a rhythmic expansion and contraction of its featureless surface that seemed to distort the air around it, creating strange, almost illusory ripples that shimmered in their peripheral vision. During a routine spectral analysis, the containment field, designed to withstand unimaginable pressures and energy fluctuations, suddenly failed, not with a bang, but with a horrifying sigh of implosion, its intricate magnetic locks and energy barriers simply ceasing to exist as if they were never there, leaving the Umbra sample precariously exposed, floating in the center of the now compromised chamber. Alarms blared, a cacophony of urgent warnings, and the automated emergency protocols kicked in, sealing off the chamber, flooding it with inert gases. But it was too late. Before the secondary containment could fully engage, Dr. Tanaka, who had been in the observation booth, his face pressed against the thick reinforced glass, saw it. He saw the Umbra sample expand, not grow in mass, but spread like an impossibly dark stain across the pristine floor of the chamber, its edges sharp and absolute, consuming everything it touched with a terrifying speed. A desperate attempt to re-establish containment was launched, involving a multispectral energy pulse designed to destabilize Umbra's quantum entanglement. But as the pulse hit the spreading darkness, something unprecedented, something utterly horrifying occurred. The energy, instead of disrupting Umbra, was instantly, completely absorbed. And then, with an almost deliberate malevolence, the blackness rebounded, sending a ripple of inverse energy, a wave of palpable absence, outwards from its core. The lead technician operating the pulse generator, a man named Michael, let out a choked cry, clutching his head, and then crumpled to the floor, his skin instantly grey, his eyes vacant and still, not dead, but something far worse. Something utterly hollowed out, as if his internal light, his very life force, had been meticulously siphoned away, leaving behind an empty shell. The silence that followed was more terrifying than any scream, a testament to the efficient, silent consumption wrought by Umbra. Petrova, now truly terrified, her scientific understanding shattered by the sheer impossibility of what they were witnessing, frantically tried to reason with Thorne, who, by now, was staring at the expanding void with a terrifying mixture of awe and obsession. He spoke in hushed, almost reverent tones, not of containing it, but of understanding it, of allowing it to unfold, convinced that this was the ultimate expression of a universal truth, a gateway to a reality beyond human comprehension. He believed that Umbra wasn't malevolent, but simply was, a fundamental force of anti-creation, and that to fight it was to fight the very nature of existence. His eyes, usually sharp and analytical, now held a disturbing glassy sheen, reflecting nothing but the spreading darkness. It was clear that Umbra wasn't just absorbing matter and energy. It was absorbing minds, subtly reshaping perception, twisting ambition into a horrifying zealotry, consuming the will to resist. Dr. Tanaka, still reeling from the vision of the technician's demise, began to back away slowly, his face contorted in a silent scream of primal fear. But as he reached the airlock, A section of the floor near him, a single square foot of gleaming steel, simply dissolved into the absolute blackness of umbra, expanding outwards with an agonizing slowness, yet an undeniable inevitability. He stumbled, falling backwards, and as the darkness touched his hand, he let out a guttural choke sound, not of pain, but of utter, soul-shattering emptiness. His form began to ripple, to waver, as if he were a poorly rendered hologram, and then, piece by horrifying piece, his body, his clothes, his very essence began to fade, to unravel into nothingness, leaving behind not a trace, not a single molecule to mark his existence. He was gone, absorbed by the void, his memory already beginning to blur in the minds of the horrified survivors, as if the umbra was also consuming the very concept of his past. Petrova knew then that there was no reasoning with Thorn, no containing the monstrosity they had unleashed. It wasn't merely a substance, it was a phenomenon, a localized breach in the fundamental laws of conservation, a cancerous growth of non-existence that threatened to consume everything. She scrambled to a secure terminal, her fingers flying across the keys, attempting to initiate a full-scale facility lockdown and transmit a desperate distress signal, a warning to the outside world, however futile it might seem. But Umbra had already permeated the facility's systems, its silent creeping influence corrupting data streams, scrambling communication frequencies, turning their advanced technology against them. The screens around her flickered with static, distorted images of the encroaching blackness, an unsettling visual cacophony of information decay. Thorn, meanwhile, stood mesmerized, now almost within arm's reach of the expanding umbra, his face alight with a terrifying beatific smile, muttering about ultimate knowledge, about transcending the limitations of light and shadow, about becoming one with the fundamental truth of the universe. Petrova, watching him, felt a chilling wave of despair, realizing that he wasn't just being absorbed physically, but spiritually, his consciousness being willingly surrendered to the consuming dark. She saw him extend a hand, not in fear, but in welcome, reaching out to the undulating blackness as it rippled towards him, beckoning him into its impossible depths. And then, like Tanaka before him, he began to fade, his form dissolving not into dust, but into pure absence. His final expression a serene, chilling smile as the last vestiges of his being were swallowed by the ultimate void. Petrova was alone, the sole sentient being left in a facility rapidly being devoured by a cosmic horror, the air growing heavy with the chill of non-existence, the silence pressing in on her eardrums with an unbearable weight. She knew her time was short, that Umbra was a contagion of anti-reality, but she had to try one last desperate gambit. Remembering Thorn's earliest theories about localized quantum entanglement, she frantically recoded a dormant experimental energy projector, aiming to create a highly focused, oscillating field of positive energy, not to destroy Umbra, for she knew that was impossible, but to create a localized repulsion field, a shimmering barrier of pure, energetic resistance. A desperate attempt to push back the encroaching void, even if only for a few precious moments. She set the parameters to overload, a suicidal blast that would consume the reactor core itself, knowing it was her only chance to create a temporary pocket of safety, a fleeting window for escape, or at least to send one final chilling message. The projector whined to life, a desperate cry against the encroaching silence, its energy beam lashing out, not with destructive force, but with a shimmering, almost ethereal light, a counterforce against the absolute darkness. For a moment, a glorious, agonizing moment, the Umbra recoiled, its edges wavering, a faint shimmer of defiance against its relentless consumption. Petrova seized the opportunity, racing towards the main exit portal, punching in override codes, feeling the cold tendrils of the encroaching darkness lick at her heels, the very air around her growing thin, the boundaries of her own perception beginning to blur. She could feel her memories fraying, her sense of self dissolving, the oppressive weight of non-existence pressing down on her, whispering promises of oblivion. She barely made it to the last airlock, her hand slammed against the emergency release, just as the last vestige of the energy projector flickered and died, consumed by the relentless darkness, allowing Umbra to surge forward, engulfing the entire main chamber in an instant, its silent hunger now focused entirely on her. The airlock hissed shut, separating her from the absolute blackness by mere inches of reinforced steel. But she knew it was a temporary reprieve, a fleeting victory against an unstoppable force. She stumbled through the emergency tunnels, the facility groaning around her as the very foundations of reality began to unravel under Umbra's persistent consumption. She reached the surface, gasping for breath, the harsh desert sun, a welcome, almost painful assault on her senses after the suffocating darkness below. But the horror didn't end there. As she looked back at the sealed entrance to Horizon Labs, she saw it, a faint shimmer in the desert air, a distortion in the heat haze, an impossible shadow that seemed to ripple upwards from the earth, staining the horizon with an unnerving, almost imperceptible blackness, a darkness that was slowly, silently, inexorably expanding. She knew Umbra hadn't been contained, it had merely been delayed, a cancerous growth on the very fabric of existence, silently expanding its dominion, consuming light, heat, sound, matter, memory, and perhaps eventually the entirety of creation, leaving behind nothing but an eternal absolute void. The shadows didn't follow us, they led. And now they lead humanity into an unimaginable future, a future where the darkness isn't just an absence of light, but an active, consuming entity, a horror beyond comprehension that quietly, patiently, hungrily waits. The Vanta Experiment, or Project Umbra, as it became known in the hushed, terrified whispers of the few who now comprehend its existence, was not merely a scientific endeavor gone wrong. It was a cosmic awakening, a brutal reminder that some doors are better left unopened, some truths too terrifying for the human mind to bear. And as you contemplate the implications of such a reality, of a material that consumes more than light, leaving behind not just darkness but utter non-existence, remember that the true horror often lies not in what we see, but in what we cannot, in the silent, creeping void that threatens to swallow everything we hold dear. If this chilling tale has captivated your imagination and sent a shiver down your spine, please remember to like this video. Your engagement helps us bring more dark and terrifying stories to life, and for more content that delves into the eerie, the unexplained, and the utterly horrifying. Make sure to subscribe for more horror content and join our community of fear enthusiasts. The shadows are always listening, and so are we, ready to share the next unspeakable truth.